Hi. I'm narrating this video, and you're hearing my words. But the message itself is actually from someone you know, who cares about you. They want to talk to you later about something personal that's very important for both of you, but they're concerned that your two brain types might not match very well. They admire and respect you a lot. That's why they're sharing this with you. Hopefully this will be a big help for both of you. Okay? You know, people have different blood types, genotypes, and even personality types. But most people don't realize there are also different brain types. This is based on research about thought patterns and neuropathways. Understanding brain types can make your life so much easier. It can even make you more happy. And it's actually very simple. Imagine that your brain is made up of hundreds of thousands of small compartments, or cubbyholes. Think of your brain like it's a vast network of tiny little post office boxes. These boxes are laid out in an incredibly complex system. Each of our brains have millions and millions of these little compartments. That's where we receive and organize information. As you observe and learn things, your brain puts a label on each new box. Sometimes you actively assist in this process. But more often, the brain acts on its own, and this labeling just happens naturally. By labeling the boxes, the brain is more easily able to retrieve information, evaluate it, and feed it to you when you need it. For instance, if you want to watch a certain TV show, your brain goes to that little compartment labeled for that specific show. In there, it finds all the stored information about that show. It can retrieve information you already have about the storyline, characters, actors, and even your impressions and opinions about the show. And it's all stored under that show's label. Likewise, if a friend mentions a certain restaurant to you, your brain may or may not already have a box for that particular restaurant. If you've never heard of that restaurant, or never been there, your brain may have no compartment at all for it. Once you begin to learn about the restaurant, your brain will automatically create a box, put a label on it, and begin to gather and organize information relating to that new cubbyhole. Now, it's important to realize that your brain doesn't create and apply all of these thousands of labels in exactly the same way. In fact, there's some inconsistency. This is where the concept of brain typing comes in. Let's look at how the three main types work. When your brain places a label on a compartment, it chooses one of three kinds of filing categories. The first one is O-type. You can remember this type by relating the letter O to the word open. When your brain creates an O-type compartment, it recognizes that the information in that compartment is open, observable, objective, and usually obvious. In other words, this is the kind of information that virtually anyone can know and verify based on practical, real-life experience. This would be the sort of label that the vast majority of people could readily accept and agree with. For example, let's say your brain visits the box labeled airplanes. Then, drawing upon information in that compartment, your brain says to you, "Airplanes fly." This would be an O-type statement. It's clearly observable that airplanes fly. Most people have even been inside an airplane and actually flown somewhere. This open information is pretty obvious. Lots of other O-type labels exist in your brain. Here are some examples, and you can surely think of many more. On a clear day, the sky is blue. Drinking bleach is not good for you. Snow is cold and fire is hot. Humans need oxygen to breathe. Gravity pulls things toward the ground. Cows normally have 4 legs. When your brain uses O-type categories, it's not claiming to understand all the hows or whys for that information. The brain doesn't need to explain everything in detail to use a label. It simply applies the label because the facts are observable and rather obvious to almost all rational human beings. Now let's look at the next type. This is the S-type category. This is where things might get a little murky. As opposed to the O category that stands for open, the letter S stands for shut. This indicates that in these kinds of compartments the information is shuttered, subjective, and sealed, based on your own way of looking at things. The factual nature of this information is not generally agreed upon or universally accepted. The brain may often draw upon your personal opinions, feelings, beliefs, and private interpretations to create the S-type category. Although some other people's S-type labels may match your own, there is no broad consensus about the accuracy. It's not the same as with O-type labels. For example, let's say your brain visits a box labeled tomatoes. It tells you, ripe tomatoes are red. That is an O-type statement. Pretty much everyone in the world agrees that ripe tomatoes are red. By the same token, what if your brain says, tomatoes are used to make ketchup? Again, this is O-type information. People can actually go to a ketchup factory and see for themselves how tomatoes are used to make ketchup. There's not much to debate there. However, what if your brain tells you something like, tomatoes are delicious? Is this still an O-type statement? No, not at all. The statement tomatoes are delicious is definitely S-type information. Can you tell why? For starters, it's clear that this claim is based on personal preference and taste. Not every rational person would agree with the statement. Many people don't like the taste of tomatoes, and some may even consider them disgusting. What's more, there's no way to actually demonstrate the factual nature of what the brain is telling you. So, we see that S-type categories tend to be based on preferences, beliefs, and observations that are directly linked to subjective personal experiences. They don't necessarily relate to other people's experiences, and especially not to everyone's. Here are some examples of other S-type statements. This is the best movie ever made. That's the worst song in the world. My horoscope is never wrong. It's bad luck if a black cat crosses your path. I just know in my heart that ghosts are real. Alternative medicine works better than traditional medicine. All politicians are corrupt and can't be trusted. My sixth sense tells me what's going to happen. Chocolate is the best flavor for ice cream. Every time I dream about something, it happens. You get the idea. Within the brain, S-type categories are extremely common. There are literally tens of thousands of them. The brain creates most S-type categories because we as humans are emotional creatures. Our emotions have served us well. Some would argue that the human race has survived because of our emotional nature. The emotion of fear has been especially important to our survival. When our primitive ancestors heard a rustling noise in the tall grass, fear made them react quickly. They didn't calmly wait around to see what happened next. In the modern world, much of what our ancestors feared doesn't exist anymore. Most of us are safe in our daily lives from any actual physical danger. Still, our inherited instincts continue to affect our brains emotionally. In fact, the brain creates most S-type categories based entirely on emotion. And here's a shocker. Without some conscientious prodding, the brain doesn't distinguish between O-type and S-type categories. For the brain, both of them are accurate and reliable. However, in the real world, the two categories have very different ramifications. When we don't distinguish between them in our lives, we can experience problems. These problems can include everything from frustration and disappointment to downright destructive behaviors and human tragedy. For example, when the brain assumes that S-type information is actually O-type, your interactions with other people can be negatively affected. Would an angry person actually punch someone in the face because they disagreed about the taste of tomatoes? Oh yes, stranger things have happened. The world is filled with examples of people attacking or controlling others based purely on the brain's S-type categories. We see this often in the following areas of human endeavor: politics, religion, personal and family values, culture and customs, race and gender, and even economic issues. When two people try to interact and communicate, it's often the case that one is using an O-type category while the other person is relying on S-type information. It gets even more bizarre if both are relying on S-types. A discussion like that almost always goes nowhere. Just listen to two people arguing about religion or attacking each other's political party. Ironically, both people firmly believe that they're on solid O-type ground, when actually nothing could be further from the truth. Now let's look at the last category. The third and final category is the U-type label. This is a truly handy label but rarely used by most brains. In this instance, you can think of the letter U as standing for words like unknown, undiscovered, unmeasured, undetermined, or even unidentifiable. This category is, in essence, for things that the brain can't actually know. It covers information no one really knows. For many brains, this is a hard label because the three most scary words in the world are, I don't know. Sometimes, not having answers to life's big questions can be truly frightening. So, since we are emotional creatures, the brain creates labels based on assumptions and limited data. It does this to fill in the gaps, so to speak. It makes and applies bad labels in order to make us think we know things that we literally don't know. In most cases, the brain has to work pretty hard to label a compartment with a U-type category. Naturally, the brain would rather comfort us by making us think we have the answers. This unhealthy process may make us feel less fearful and more confident, but it doesn't really serve us well in the real world. In most cases, your brain's sloppy use of categories isn't your fault. It has nothing to do with your intelligence or education. It mainly comes from emotional conditioning and personal experiences. When you're told something as a small child, your little brain automatically creates a label. That label can stick throughout your life. Unless you wake up at some point and recognize that a category is mislabeled, it just hangs on the cubbyhole forever. Fortunately, with a little effort, the brain can be trained to recognize the differences between O, S, and U categories. At any point, your brain can learn how to rewrite and reapply labels. This is really a wonderful thing, and can be done in 3 easy steps. First, you need to become familiar with the 3 categories. This will let your brain begin to self-evaluate as it decides how to label things. The categories are very simple, and there are only 3 of them. Let's review them once more. O is for open. This category is for information that is readily provable, that can be easily and repeatedly observed by anyone. Every rational person in the world pretty much accepts and relies on O-type information. For example, airplanes fly. The sky is blue. Ripe tomatoes are red. Rain is wet. Next is S. It stands for shut. This category is for information that is figuratively shut away inside you. It can't be proven because it's uniquely personal or anecdotal. This kind of information can't be observed by just anyone, and there is no general consensus or agreement about it. This means it doesn't serve as a standard or have an accepted application for the entire population. For example, chocolate is the best ice cream flavor. Watch out for black cats. I know ghosts are real. Or, Bob was abducted by aliens. Keep in mind that even if a relatively large number of brains share the same S-type category, it doesn't become O-type information. In the absence of good, reliable, quality evidence, it remains S-type. For example, how many people have been saying something like this? The Earth is flat. Last, U stands for unknown. This category is for information that we as humans don't possess. In spite of what some people may claim or believe, we just flat out don't know. This doesn't mean that humankind will never have the answers. It just means that at the moment, no one knows for sure. The brain must admit and accept that. This includes, for example, the answers to questions like these. What is the meaning of life? Is there a purpose to the universe? What is consciousness and how does it arise? What happens after we die? Is time travel possible? Okay, so knowing the 3 categories is step 1. Now let's look at step 2 for our brain training. Begin to develop a habit of asking yourself this question. Has my brain mislabeled what I'm thinking or saying? In other words, based on the criteria we've discussed, does the information from a particular cubbyhole actually fit the label your brain has glued to it? If your brain tells you that sushi is wonderful, do you recognize that that's definitely an S-type category? Or do you let your brain wrongly convince you that it's an O-type? Policing your categories is an extremely important part of bringing your thinking into line with reality. All of us have active imaginations and like to fantasize. Sometimes we even know that information flowing from our brain isn't accurate. But often we don't care. It's comforting and even self-satisfying to indulge our gray matter. However, there are plenty of situations in life where mistyped categories can get you into serious trouble. Much harm has occurred among human beings because people insist that their S-type thinking is an O or U-type category. Marriages and families have failed, careers have been lost, much pain and abuse have been inflicted, and even nations have fallen because of this human tendency. If your brain tells you that you can safely take a nap on molten lava, it doesn't matter how certain your brain may be that this information is valid O-type information. Not to be redundant, but reality has an unrelenting way of staying real. Reality doesn't care what your brain thinks or how it categorizes information. Reality acts independently and consistently, regardless of human brain activity. A hungry bear doesn't care at all about those little compartments in your head. Above all, don't be reluctant to train your brain to apply a U-type category when it's appropriate. Actually, an experienced and wise brain is much more willing to say, "We just don't know." It's the lazy, confused brain that insists S-type is the only way to go. Alright, now to the third and final step. Begin to apply your newfound understanding of the brain process to your everyday life. For example, when you have a discussion with someone, monitor your own thoughts for fuzzy categories. Are you using an S-type category and claiming it's an O? Are you reluctant to replace an old S-type with a new U-type? By the same token, pay close attention to the other person and what they're saying. If they're acting like one of their points is an O-type, analyze it using our criteria to see if their claim holds water. By learning what constitutes each type, you can readily begin to tell whether you're having a productive discussion, or if someone is just doing a snow job on you. You can use these categories for more than just talking with people. Practice applying them to your everyday thinking as it relates to all the decisions you make. Try to determine how often you're choosing a certain course just because you're emotionally conditioned to go with S-type categories. You can make a course correction and get on the reality bandwagon. With a little practice, you'll begin to experience a new sort of brain function. Your world will suddenly become clearer and begin to make more sense. You'll start to see less conflict with reality and find greater harmony with the world around you. You'll be more productive and happy because your brain will begin to operate in accordance with how the world actually functions. There'll be no more pretending that your S-type info consistently works. Please take some time to consider what I've shared with you. Don't be afraid or worried. I know this information is new and may seem a little troubling at first. That's normal anytime there's a change or adjustment. Take some time to let it sink in. If you do, it will make sense. Also, as I mentioned, someone has something really important they want to talk to you about. Ideally, both of your brains can be on the same frequency. They are willing to watch their labels if you'll watch yours. I hope you found this helpful. Thank you.